Hello, everyone. Today we'll start talking about Peterson's part of the chapter on mind and rationality. And the kinds of questions we'll be asking in this chapter are not quite about how to be reasonable or what it is to be mindful. Like there are a lot of books you can read about what it is to be mindful of yourself, of your surroundings, or what it is to think well, and so on. So there's a lot of like research that you can do on those things. What we're going to be asking in this chapter is something slightly different and in many ways more difficult. We're going to be asking what mind is, what rationality amounts to, and what does it say about us, the beings that have minds that are rational? What about the kinds of things that we are? And whether or not that has any implications for things like God existing or not existing. How does the fact that we are mind beings, that we have, that we can think, that we're reasonable, that we're conscious of ourselves, how is that consciousness or mind or rationality? How does that relate with, fit with, or fail to fit with things like natural evolution, things like God? How does that fact of minds, the existence of minds, the capacity for rational deliberation, how does that fit with the evolutionary story? One question. And two, how does it fit with the theistic story? Second question. Those are the questions we're going to be looking at in this chapter. So let us begin. So Peterson in the preeminence of mind. Mind is everywhere. A lot of beings have minds and experiences. In fact, we are minds. We experience the world. And that matters. That is significant. Here's what Peterson says. I see powers of mind, such as self-consciousness or the capacity to form rational beliefs, the capacity to know reality, as evidence of the unique and special kinds of creatures that we are. There's something distinctive about the kinds of things that we are. Essential to what we are, very distinctive of what we are, is that we're conscious. There are other things in the world, like this cup, that exist as well, but they're not conscious. They don't deliberate. They don't form beliefs. They don't know. They're not the kinds of things that can make moral decisions. They can be moral agents or can be capable of love and loving. And all of that seems to be predicated upon love and friendship and so on, seems to be predicated upon an ability to be conscious, to think of ourselves as eyes, as selves, to think, to deliberate, to know what to do, to understand our surroundings. Our status as moral agents is grounded in our capacity to reason, to think, and to be conscious of ourselves. So there's a very important difference between things like this and things like this, right? This one has the mind rationality consciousness thing that this one does not like. And part of what is distinctive about this thing is precisely the having the mind and rationality and consciousness. So what is that? What are those things that are distinctive of this thing that this thing does not have? Those are the question for us. And Peterson thinks rightfully that that matters, right? That those minds, the fact that I have a mind, that I have self-consciousness, is something unique and crucial about me. If you're going to tell a story about me, you can talk about my height, you can talk about the color of my skin, you can talk about all sorts of things about me. But if you don't mention the fact that I am a conscious, self-conscious, rational agent capable of moral decision making, if you don't mention any of that, you have failed to note something central, something essential about who I am. You've kind of failed to say one of the crucial things, or perhaps the crucial thing about me. Here, Peterson continues. From Rousseau's perspective, rationality is an evolutionary adaptation that is incapable of delivering objective knowledge. And again, this is not a caricature on Peterson's behalf. Rousseau believes this. So Peterson is reporting this out on Rousseau's behalf, not caricaturing Rousseau into this position. That's what Rousseau thinks. I sketch here a theory of mind, says Peterson, that is faithful to both science, understood in the realist sense, and the ability to give us objective knowledge of the world, and of theology. So the picture of mind that Peterson is going to put forth is one that fits well with the Christian story that he endorses, and it's also one that fits well with the scientific story that all scientists and everyone should endorse. And furthermore, that anchors human uniqueness of the kinds of things that we are require minds, or that's what basic thing that makes us distinctive. And that's what makes us unique in some important sense. So Peterson points to a couple of problems in philosophy of mind. And there is the easy problem of consciousness, And this might be a misnomer because it's far from easy, but it's easier than the other problem, which is the hard problem. So it's at least easier than the other problem, but it's been labeled the easy problem, so just call it that. And the easy problem of consciousness is to figure out, to understand how the brain causes conscious mental states. And to solve this problem involves mapping neural patterns in the brain with conscious thoughts and experiences. And that's what a lot of neuroscientists are doing nowadays, right? So think of myself, I'm a mind, have a mind. And here's a blue cup, right? I look at the blue cup and this experience of blue cup happens in me, in my mind. And part of what it is to solve the easy problem of consciousness is to be able to develop a story about the inner workings of the brain here, in which the chemical and physiological, neurological kind of processes that occur in the giving rise of the experience of blue, of experiencing blue. And someone who has effectively solved the easy problem of consciousness is someone who is able to tell a very detailed story about the inner workings of the brain and how the different kind of patterns of chemical, electrical charges, or however the brain works, the inner workings of the mind, the brain, how those inner workings of the brain correspond to or track or cause experiences, the thing that what it feels like to see the cup. And of course, what it feels like to see the cup is not a neurological chemical process in the brain, right? The neurological process in the brain or the chemical process in the brain, that is the thing that causes the experience. So it's crucial not to confuse those two things. The experience of blue is what we as subjects, as agents have, the way we mediate through the world, the way in which we use experience to mediate our knowledge about the world. But that is not to be identified with. It is just a different kind of thing to have the neurological chemical processes in the brain. The thing the neuroscientists are studying is something in the brain. So to solve the problem of the easy problem of consciousness is just to map, to correspond, to create this kind of correspondence between brain states and the mental states, the experience of blue, in some brain happenings, some happenings in the brain, physical, physiological happenings in the brain. So it's a hard problem to solve, but it's easier than the problem I'm about to talk about. So let's call it the easy problem of consciousness. Now, here's the hard problem of consciousness. Explaining why we have phenomenal experience, or even what it is, what having phenomenological experiences is, what consciousness itself is. And in order to see that these are different problems, think of Mary. This is just a hypothetical person. And Mary, let us suppose, is a very accomplished neuroscientist. She has a complete knowledge of the brain. So this is in the future when all of these things are discovered. So she knows everything there is to know about the brain, the inner workings of the brain. So she knows exactly what happens in the brain when a normal person looks at a blue object and the experience of blue happens there. She knows it causes the experience of the brain state that takes place that causes the experience of blue happens in the brain. She also knows exactly what happens in the brain when, say, I think about my car, when I think about my children, when I dream. Like, she just knows exactly the inner workings of the brain, how all of that's arranged. And she can solve the easy problem. She can map for every possible experience. She can mental experience. She can map a physiological kind of happening in the brain. So she can solve the easy problem of consciousness. She hasn't yet solved the hard problem. And here's a way of bringing that out. Let us further suppose that Mary is blind. She's never seen blue. She's never seen anything. She cannot see. So even though she can tell everything there is to tell about the inner workings of the brain when a normal person with normal sight sees a blue object, she can describe perfectly well to the to every single detail about the inner workings of the brain. She can describe what happens that gives rise to the experience of seeing blue. Here's something that she doesn't know, namely what it is like to see blue. She's blind. her knowledge, complete knowledge of the brain, is insufficient for her to know something very important, something you and I know, namely what it's like, what it feels like, the experience of seeing blue. And of course, there's nothing distinctive about blue, right? It's just my example. All of our experiences are that way. We have this immediate access to them by being experiencers, by being agents, by being minds that have experiences. Solving the easy problem, like Mary has in a hypothetical case, is not enough for her to know all sorts of things about minds, like what it is like to experience those things. It would take solving the hard problem of consciousness to know that, and Mary doesn't know that. So here's what Peterson says. The subjective occurrences, such as the felt quality of emotion, mental states, what it's like to see blue and so on, those seem inaccessible from a third person perspective. That's why Mary cannot know them as a scientist. So think again of this cup. I look at the cup, I form the experience of blue cup. Here's what scientists do, right? They open up my brain, in a way of speaking. They look into my brain and find physiological facts about neurons firing and electrical chemical events happening there. Here's what they will not find in there: a picture of this blue cup. There is no picture of a blue cup in my brain. And yet, when I see the blue cup and something happens in my brain, the mind, has this picture of a blue cup. But the picture of a blue cup that is my experience will not be found by looking in there. What's in there is just not a picture of a cup. What's there is something very different, is the thing that causes or gives rise to the experience that is the picture of the cup. It is not the picture of the cup. In other words, experiences are necessarily subjective. They're from a perspective, this perspective that I'm watching. And the third person perspective, the observer, someone looking at my brain, is just not the way of going about finding the experiences of blue objects. So it is just kind of beyond the scope of science, to the extent that science relies upon providing third-person perspective descriptions of reality. Mary, as the scientist who knows everything but is herself blind, cannot know what it is like to see a blue cup, because she's blind. She does not see it. And crucially, the results of her studies are not the kind of thing that will tell her what it's like to see blue. That's the hard problem of consciousness, not the easy problem of consciousness. So the point is that what it's like to be conscious eludes scientific description in objective third-person terms. It is necessarily a first-person perspective description of the experience. And unless you're an experiencer, you cannot know what it's like to have the experience. Third-person description will not do. It cannot do. Furthermore, and I've emphasized this already, consciousness, the ability of being self-aware, is required for being a person, for personhood. And personhood is the condition for things like human relationships, for being in love and doing those kinds of things that matter. So answering these kinds of problems are fundamental for understanding the other things that we care about, that matter to us. Peterson continues. Although humans have an animal prehistory, of course we cannot deny that. Natural evolution explains a lot about us. We are also rational, soulish creatures. And Peterson uses the loose terminology, soulish creatures, to point out things like we have personalities, we can know, we can reason, we're capable of moral agency. And let's just call those things souls, right? Like let's not fight too much about what a soul is in this sense, at least to get a handle on the kinds of things that we do, the activities that we perform. And Peterson continues, this fact about our being rational, soulish creatures demands or begs for an adequate worldview explanation. In other words, a worldview should accommodate, respect, and explain why it is that we are, beings that have minds, that have rationality, that are soulish individuals. Why is that? Here is Peterson's basic answer. And he calls this emergent dualism. So it's a kind of dualism. The mind is different from the body. The body is this thing that occupies space. The mind, well, something slightly different. And here are the basic claims behind emergent dualism. Peterson positions about the nature of the mind. His attempt at answering the hard problem of consciousness. Quote, that the subject of conscious experience cannot be a material object is increasingly clear, but the evidence shows that consciousness arises as a result of brain function. What it is to be mind is an elusive kind of category, it's hard to pin down, but it's clearly correlated with the brain, right? Brain damage leads to mental impairment. In the brain is clearly directly intertwined with, connected with mental experience. It causes mental states. And emergent dualism is a way of trying to make justice to both of those facts, the facts that minds don't seem to be physical in any robust sense of the word physical, but also that they're dependent upon the physical in different ways. So emergent dualism encompasses both insights, but affirming that there's an immaterial subject of experiences and that it emerges from the brain and nervous system. When the neuroscientist looks into my head to look for my experience of blue, they cannot find it there because there's a sense in which it's not there. It is me, the self, that has the experiences. What's happening in the brain is connected with that, but it's not it. My mind is not identical to my brain. So the mind is an emergent property, says Peterson. What are those things? Well, here's the third quote. These emergent properties are not observable in simpler configurations, nor are they derivable from the laws that describe the properties of matter in simpler configurations. The mind is something that arises out of the systematic arrangement of the nervous system and the brain, the way in which the nervous system and the brain work together. They give rise to this new phenomena that is the mind, that is not reducible to the physiological facts that compose the nervous system and the brain. Emergent properties are in other places as well. It's not that the mind is peculiar in this sense. So think of like facts about chemistry, chemical facts. Those are emergent properties, arguably, upon fundamentally physical laws or facts. That one knows all there is to know about fundamental physics, for example, quantum mechanics. If you know your quantum mechanics very well, wonderful, but you still will not be able to predict some basic chemical facts. Why? Because some of those chemical facts do not reduce to fundamental physical facts. They depend upon those fundamental physical facts. But if you're a great physicist, that you need not be a good chemist, right? To be a chemist is to study kind of the system organization of matter at a different level of generality, at the chemical level. So the chemical facts depend upon the physical facts, fundamental physical facts, but not in such a way that they're predictable from the fundamental physical facts about quarks and so on. They emerge from those facts, but they're not reducible to those facts. So that's how mind works as well. Mind is not reducible to the body, though the body kind of, the way in which the body structure gives rise to, and from that body emerges the mind. So what does that say about humans and how distinct they are from other animals? Well, things get complicated, says Peterson. The pressing question is, are human beings a special kind of creature of superior status and value, or do humans differ only in degrees from animals? It's worth pointing out that some scientists argue for mere difference in degrees. Some people are very committed to we're just part of the spectrum, that's it. There's nothing special. And some theists, in particular, argue for more radical distinctness. And Peterson thinks that they're actually both mistaken. There's a sense in which, of course, we're part of the spectrum, the scientist, correct? But there's also a sense in which the theist is correct. We're, this is more distinct as our ability to, our self-awareness seems to be at a different level, our rationality seems to be at a different level than lower animals. And that's kind of worth flagging. So it's not a clear answer. The one that Peterson gives us is a combination of both uniqueness and continuity. And here's what Peterson says. That is the human lot, both continuities and discontinuities with the rest of nature. So it's not a clear-cut answer. The question of human specialness can never be settled scientifically, and brings us once again to the philosophical clash between naturalism and theism. And this is again the same point that Peterson makes over and over to make sure that people are not confusing his points. He's not saying from a scientific perspective we can describe this. He's very aware that science has its limitations and we provide scientific results, and then we reason upon those scientific results and ask questions that are not properly asked by scientists, but they're still intelligent questions that are, philosophers ask. And he's saying, what I'm saying is at the level of the philosopher, the worldview challenge, the worldview points, which are incorporate science, but are not exhausted by science. So, okay, let's end here. I'll see you next time.